talking about the learning objective. And I want you guys to be able to use dialogue to move your story forward and to create character. And we're also going to look at how you can use dialogue to build character and your best practices with using dialogue. That's what we're going to start with. So let's go forward. And you have these in your notes in front of you, so you can be looking at your notes or you can be looking up here. I wanted to take some of the pressure off of copying so we could just really talk. Okay, dialogue helps build character and move your story forward. That's why people use it. Readers really enjoy dialogue. They like it. It makes the reading, it's engaging, and it makes the story relatable. It makes the story move a little more quickly. That said, dialogue may or may not be the right choice for your narrative. It depends upon your topic. So there's no requirement to use dialogue in your narrative, but it is an option, it is a tool. And some of you really did a great job, from what I could see sharing, at using that dialogue. Those of you who shared used the dialogue in a really effective way. So here are my 5 tips, and these are also in your notes. When you use dialogue, you want to be authentic. You want to talk the way people actually talk. You don't want to, people don't necessarily communicate in complete sentences. Okay, people respond with one word. Sometimes people respond with a shrug. Sometimes people misunderstand what you're saying. So you want to think about how people really talk to each other if you're going to use dialogue. It's a great way to show character traits without actually having to come out and say it. And I'm thinking of Kayla's, where Kayla was talking about the one, I think it was the brother who was just sort of like, whatever, don't overreact. Was that, is that yours? Yeah, that's showing the character. I could tell that about the brother without her having to come out as a writer and say, he tended to be this way. I mean, you can do both, but the dialogue can show the character. So my first tip with dialogue is you want to be authentic. The second tip kind of goes along with that. It's going to seem a little contradictory, but they go together. You do want to slightly elevate the dialogue. You want it to be authentic, but you don't want it to be exactly the way people talk, and here's what I'm talking about. A lot of times when we talk, we add a lot of what my speech teacher in 8th grade used to call verbal burps. Well, okay, you know, like. You don't want to have too much of that in the writing because it's hard on the reader. If you're adding if you're going to really replicate exactly the way a person talks and you add a lot of those in, it's going to be very hard. The reader's going to they're going to lose what you really want to say. They're going to lose the thread of your story. So you do take the way people talk and you turn it up like maybe 2 notches. Okay, so in dialogue, people are sometimes wittier or funnier or more clever than they are in real life, right? You ever hear people talk to each other on TV? They say the snappy things to each other. Sometimes we have those moments, but usually we're just saying kind of normal things to each other. So sometimes you do want to turn it up a little bit, have a little bit of a little bit more of it, but still true to the way people talk. So I tend to put, like when I'm writing dialogue, I'll tell you something, I tend to put well at the beginning a lot. Well, I don't know what to do. Well, what do you think we should do? Maybe we should do this. And that's okay, but I usually end up taking most of those out. Maybe not all of them. Maybe I leave 1 or 2 in, just for color, just to show a little folksiness in my dialogue, but don't leave all of them in. So that's one thing. You want to sound authentic, but maybe 2 notches above the way we normally communicate. Maybe smarter, funnier, or dumber, depending on the character. Maybe more, like I said, some of those, sometimes it's a little bit more polished than what we might say in everyday life because it is a story. So that's something to think about. Tip number 3 is get to the good stuff. And that's what I liked about when Kayla was reading hers to us. She started in the middle. A lot of times when I see some writers, they'll be like, hi, how are you? I'm good. What are you doing today? Oh, I'm nothing. I'm just sitting here. They finally get to the thing we care about. So I want you to think about that right away. Feel free to start in the middle of the conversation. Look, if we're confused as the reader, and that's why we do peer review, if I were reading Kayla's paper and I was confused, I'm like, I like how you started here, but maybe just give me a little more information here. We can do that. But it's better to kind of start in the middle instead of having a bunch of stuff the reader doesn't need. So let me show you, this is an excerpt from The Crush by Trevor Noah from Born a Crime. And notice how he gets right to what's most important. Then we had the mid-year school holidays. The day we came back, Zahira wasn't at school. Then she wasn't at school the next day. Then she wasn't at school the day after that. Eventually, I went and tracked down Joanne on the quad. Hey, where's Zahira? Now, in actual life, he might have said, hi, how are you? How was your weekend? What's going on first? But as a reader, I don't really care about that. This is what I care about, because that's the subject of the story. So don't be afraid to do what Kayla did in her quick write. Start in the middle. Okay? If we need more information, you can always add it later, but don't be afraid to get right to the good stuff. Does this do, if I do this, does this do anything? No, that does nothing. Okay. Boop. Oh, yeah, that's what I just said, but now I added to the slideshow. Okay. Okay, simplify your speaker tags. This is something I didn't know. I actually wrote a novel, and actually at one point I was going to try to get it published. I had an agent, didn't end up working out, but this was something I learned in the process. Your speaker tags, that's the I said, he said, she said. Actually, in creative writing, we simplify those. Sometimes students are well-intentioned. They want to vary their word choice, so they'll say, I said, I proclaimed, I stated, I cried, I exclaimed, I interrogated. And I was doing that in my own novel. And then somebody said to me, like, yeah, you never want to do that. It's really amateur. It's like not professional. And I was like, really? Because the explanation she gave to me is you want those speaker tags to, for the most part, disappear into the book. You don't want people to be like paying attention to this long, really developed speaker tag. Every now and then, I think it's effective to use something like blurted out, like, because that puts a really definite picture in your reader's mind. But for the most part, you're supposed to be just said and asked. Maybe stated, but keep those simple. Another thing to think about is once you establish a pattern of who's speaking, you can actually leave them off. You don't have to, and if you look at I don't have the screenshot in here, but if you look at the Trevor Noah one, like when he's talking to Joanne on that last page, he doesn't always use a speaker tag. He sometimes just, but we know who's speaking because they go back and forth. So you can leave them off, and then if you feel like, well, I haven't used one in a while, I'm worried the reader's going to get lost, you can add one in there. Okay? And like I said here, in creative writing, mainly use said and asked. And you can pepper other more interesting words that you think are more interesting in a little bit. Okay. And our fifth tip, this is the, let me see if I can move this one. Let's let me move it, yeah. Okay. The fifth tip, okay, is the punctuation. This is not hard to get right. It's just, it's hard to make it into a habit. It's hard to make it automatic. It takes a while to make it automatic. Let me put it that way. So that's where editing, that's where asking me, how do I punctuate this? Where does the comma go? When do I capitalize? When do I not capitalize? It does take a while to build that habit. That stuff I know off the top of my head because I've been doing this for a really long time. In spite of my very youthful appearance, I've been doing this for a very long time. Okay, so when we punctuate, so remember that a new speaker equals a new paragraph, right? And I was just kind of like spying on some of your papers, and I noticed you were doing that. I noticed maybe you already knew to do that. Maybe you remembered that from the other day. Notice how the punctuation appears inside the quotation mark. Okay, that's kind of a standard, and I have that down here. You want to notice that. And this right here, this is not how most people know to do punctuation, but this is just a convention that you learn. It's almost like the speaker tag is part of the sentence. So you don't put a period here if you're using a speaker tag. If you're not using a speaker tag, then of course you would use a period there. But because you have the speaker tag, and this will take a while to get it as a habit, okay? You have a comma, close quote, speaker tag, period, open quote, capitalize. So your best, I think your best bet when you're doing dialogue is to just look at a sample, like look at a book and see how they do it. Notice how this isn't capitalized. That's a big thing that I'm usually correcting on students' papers, and it's fine. I'll correct it on your paper too. We'll figure it out and you'll fix it. But that's one of the things, like this is just a deceptively simple sentence. There's a lot happening here. You're quoting this, you're closing, you're using the comma, you're closing quotes. But just know that that's how you do it. And know that I'm not going to expect it to be perfect the first time. It takes a while to get the hang of this. You don't do a lot of creative writing, and this is, even though it's a memoir and it's something that really happened to you, it's much more on the creative side than like a stupid star essay is. I mean, a great star essay that we all loved writing. Okay. Those are my tips for dialogue. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, you have it in your notebook. The next thing I want to talk about, okay, is starting your memoir, because like I said the other day, sometimes starting it can be the hardest part. So my hope is that you'll be able to create an engaging opening that's really going to pull your reader in. And this is another place where sometimes school writing, like essay writing, kind of like ruins, I don't say it ruins writers, but it really gives kids the wrong impression of what they're able to do when we do something more creative. You're not necessarily trying to put a thesis in the beginning of this essay. So let me say that again. It's not on the slides, so I'm going to say it twice, maybe say it 3 times. You're not necessarily trying to put a thesis in the introduction. Time number 3, you're not necessarily trying to put a thesis in the introduction. You may not even have a thesis in the paper. You're probably going to get a message out, that after effect that we talked about, but it's probably going to be stated in a less obvious way. Okay? So that frees you up. You don't have to have an introduction where you introduce the topic. And I wouldn't even call it a hook. I think that what I'm going to suggest to you is different than a hook. And this is that last page that I gave you with all the writing samples on it. So this slide just lists all of them. So I'm going to go through them one at a time. You have a sample of each one. Some of them I wrote because I was a little bit in a hurry to get this ready for class, and I didn't necessarily have time to find real examples. So some of them are ones I wrote. You'll be able to tell because they don't look like they're from a book. Okay. This is the number one thing, or tip number 1, or option number 1. This doesn't mean number 1 because it's the best. It just means it's number 1 because I thought of it first. Using that sensory detail to describe the setting. Okay, and this is from The Crush. This is from Trevor Noah. Did I put that? No, I didn't put that on there. Sorry, did I put that on your thing that it's from Born a Crime? I should have. Notice it looks a little weird because it was from 2 different pages, so I had to do 2 different screenshots. In high school, the attention of girls was not an affliction I suffered from. I wasn't the hot guy in class. I wasn't even the cute guy in class. I was ugly. Puberty was not kind to me. My acne was so bad that people used to ask what was wrong with me, like I'd had an allergic reaction to something. It was the kind of acne that qualifies as a medical condition. Acne vulgaris, the doctors called it. We're not talking about pimples, kids. We're talking about pustules, big pus-filled. Look at this sensory language. Is that not to put a picture in your mind or what? Big pus-filled blackheads and whiteheads. They started on my forehead, spread down the sides of my face, and covered my cheeks and neck and ravaged me everywhere. So notice the use of sensory detail there to grab the reader in. So he talks about how he didn't have the attention of girls, and he kind of explains why. So that's something you can think about. I think about Sarah had a lot of really good sensory images in hers about the ruby and the pale face and just some things that stick out that stay in my memory. So remember that after effect. Okay. It's almost like Kayla and I planned this, but we really didn't. We really didn't. Start in the middle of an interesting conversation, and that's exactly what you just did organically. So, and you use sensory detail organically, you did this organically. So you guys already have these ideas in your head. I'm not really giving you information you might not already have. I'm just kind of putting it in one place so you can look at all your options. So that's an interesting way to pull someone into the narrative, is just start with a conversation. Okay, here's an example that I wrote. Why did you do that? Don't be so dramatic, said John, reclining back in his chair, foot on the desk, looking as relaxed as if it were Sunday and he had no place in particular to be. His relaxed demeanor only increased my sense of panic. I mean, you've only ruined, like, everything. He shrugged. Maybe not everything. So what that tends to do is obviously it starts in the middle and something's happening. There's a little bit of an argument and she feels he's done something to ruin her life and he's being blasé about it. That brings that into the conversation. So that could be the very beginning of the story because you're kind of interested. I mean, maybe not super interested, but maybe you're interested in why they're fighting, what he did that supposedly ruined everything. That is a way to start your narrative, or your memoir rather. Okay, start with vibrant action that will intrigue the reader. So maybe start with a very active opening. Sarah kind of did a combination of that, okay, as did Sam. This action, the holding the phone over the toilet, like starting with story, starting with letting action drive your narrative. Okay, and this is one that I just wrote. This is like made up. My legs seemed as if they were going to rip, not like paper, but a wet spaghetti noodle, lacking the structural integrity to stay whole. It seemed absurd to keep running on legs that felt like wet spaghetti in an oppressive heat that made my vision blurry with sweat. It was absurd and probably against the laws of nature and physics and biology and all kinds of other things I don't understand. But I had to keep running. I had to. Starting with action. So you might be interested then, well, why does this person have to be running? Why, even though they're tired, what's going on? Okay, put an idea in the mind of the reader that you want them to keep in mind as you read your story. So maybe you have a specific lesson that you want to impart, some kind of theme or idea, and you want it to be in the reader's mind when they start reading. Okay? So this is a little less story-like and a little more essay-like. So this opening right here, you guys, is a little bit more like writing an essay. And the other ones we suggested are a little bit more, boom, I'm going to put you into the story immediately. Okay, we've all had it drilled into, and I wrote this one as well. We all had it drilled into our heads that honesty is the best policy, that the only way to move through the world is to speak your truth no matter the consequences. I mean, didn't we all fawn all over George Washington because he owned up to chopping down a friggin' cherry tree? A story, which ironically is not even true. Is honesty really the best policy? Maybe not always, as I learned the hard way. So in this type of opening, you have a specific idea that you want the reader to get, and you want to set them up for that idea. So you're going to put it in the beginning of the story to make sure they keep that in mind as they read. Option number 5 is give them the background information they might need. If you feel like there's something in your story that requires a little bit of setup, or a little bit of understanding, you can do that. When I first started school, I could read on a second grade. This is from the Let's Hear It for the First Grade by Walter Dean Myers from Bad Boy. When I first started school, I could read on a second grade level, and it was suggested that I be put into that grade. I was big as most second graders too. My first grade teacher, Mrs. Dworkworth, said it was a very bad idea. So that's giving us a little bit of background information. That's another thing you might want to do in your opening. Now, you might decide to do something that's, let me show you this. I'm going to go back to the place where it's all in one spot. Wait, one moment. Okay. Oh wait, no, that's not what I'm doing. Okay, I went back to this slide because this has all the ideas on one slide. You may also, without even thinking about it, without even really like planning it, you may do also a combination of more than one. You may use sensory detail and start with a conversation. You may use sensory detail and start with action. You may, because I'm thinking of Sam's story because he had dialogue and he had, and as it was Sarah's, they had dialogue and they had a lot of sensory detail in theirs and they had action, okay? So you're probably going to do a combination of these 5 things. So there's no like, I must only use sensory detail or I must only use dialogue. You're probably going to combine them. The reason that I've broken it down this way is if you have no idea how to start it, this gives you a place to look. This gives you some models to look at. If you're sitting there going, I have no idea. I want to start, but I don't know what to do. Maybe you're like, okay, I'm just going to start by writing a conversation and let's see if that will work for the beginning. Maybe it won't work for the beginning. Maybe you use it later in the story. You might be like, okay, I'm just going to start with action. I'm thinking of Sarah's doing hers on becoming an officer. Maybe she starts hers by finding out whether she got it or not, or maybe she starts hers with learning about the opportunity. Maybe she starts hers by, I don't know, there's all different ways you can do it, but this is here to give you guys options. Writing is about making choices. Good writers make good, effective choices. Less experienced writers make ineffective choices. Okay, so you're just making a choice in the beginning. And you may just start it, and you may be doing like 3 on this list all at once. Okay, but I wanted to give you somewhere to start, some ideas, some examples, some models to look at, so you're not just sitting there staring at the blinking cursor when you write. Questions? Okay. All right. Let's go back to our learning objective. I think I wrote it in here again. Creating an engaging opening for their memoir by studying models and then checking that with a partner. That's what I want you guys to start doing. Whether you do it on your computer or you do it in your notebook, I want you to start thinking about, if you already have a topic, I want you to think about creating an engaging opening today. How are you going to grab your reader's attention? Where are you going to start your story? Because this is a story. It's a story of how I became the officer of this organization. It's the story of the time I caught my boyfriend cheating on me. It's a story of the time my first day at a new school. Where are you going to start that story? How are you going to start that story? Which of these, if you can't think of a way to start it, look at the list and see if one of those kind of like piques your interest. So that's what we're going to do with it. We have 25 minutes left. That's what we're going to do with the time we have left, is give you an opportunity to think about how you're going to start your story. If you don't have a topic, try to settle on a topic today. If you want to bounce a few ideas off me, that's what I'm here for. A lot of times we think ideas might not work, but if we talk to someone about it, we may be able to find an angle on it. Any questions on what we're doing for the rest of class? Okay, great.